Hello, Gary here from Pathways Homestead, and we're fixing to start some videos, making videos about butchering, and I'm going to start making one of those today. And before we get to sharing those videos, I wanted to share with you a lot about butchering. When we talk about butchering animals, it can be a very sensitive subject for some people, and I understand why. When animals are a created life and they should be respected, and we definitely respect those here at Pathways Homestead. But there is a very specific reason why we butcher and why we eat meat. As you guys comment, as you watch these, I hope you keep in mind that this is very spiritual to me, that as I take a life, I'm reminded of a lot of things in the Bible. As I cut meat, I'm reminded of things in the Bible. We've got these backstrap steaks cut up, butterfly steaks. We've got a pile of them. And the next piece I'm going to cut is the tenderloins. And the tenderloins, if you remember, come off the inside of the backbone. And the first thing I'm going to do is to peel all this fat off of them. Okay, I've got that fat off of them. And this silver skin here is something you try to remove as much as you can. I don't know how that's showing up in the camera, but there's a kind of a thin tendon, sinew, silver skin right there. Trimming that little bit of fat off this, since this is beef and not deer, it's going into the grind pile. We're gonna cut this in butterfly steaks just like we did the back strap. We'll do that to this tenderloin also. This is the small, real tender part on the bottom of a T-bone. That's this piece of meat. You can see that made real nice little steaks. These are real good for one of my favorite meals, which is steak and eggs. I'm cutting this next cut is the sirloin tip. Remember that come off the front of the back leg, and we're gonna trim that up. This makes a pretty good roast, and I may trim it up as a roast, or it may get cut into steak when I get to trimming it here. And that's all just sinew and gland, so that's all going in the scrap bucket that'll get fed to the pigs. When you trim a roast, any of the little flappy parts, it's kind of good to trim them off. The smaller pieces that are thin are going to cook faster, and sometimes they'll get burnt while you're cooking your roast and before your roast is cooked through. And so if you trim them off a little bit, it'll help preserve the flavor of your meat as you're cooking it. You won't get as much of a burnt flavor in it sometimes. Okay, I don't know how well that's showing up. That's a really nice sirloin tip roast there. That's probably about 2.5, 3 pound roast of just meat, and it'll make a real good roast. This cut that I have here is the rump roast. You remember it came off of the top of the hip, kind of the end of the backbone area, and that's the rump roast, and I'm going to trim it up. It usually makes a pretty good roast, so I'm going to trim it up. And that's a pretty nice rump roast right there. And the next cut is the round. Remember, that's the back of the leg, the bigger part of the back of the leg. And the round is usually broke down into 2 or 3 parts. On a smaller animal like a deer, you usually just break it down in 2. On a bigger animal like a beef, it can make 3. That'd be the top round, the bottom round, and the eye of round. Okay, there's the top round. Pretty big part. Here's the bottom round. It's a little bit smaller. And then if you can see, this piece right here is the eye of round. On a deer, you just leave that with the bottom round and it makes a bigger piece. On a beef like this, we can separate that out and use that as a separate cut of meat. These cuts here make pretty good cube steaks. They make decent roasts. They're good for cutting up for kebabs or stew meat. They're a tougher part because they're used a lot. So I'm going to trim those up and use them here in a minute. Alright, I've got one roast cut out of that top round, and then I've got the bottom round here, or the eye of round, and I've cleaned it up, and I'm just going to cut some small steaks out of it, and they'll be tenderized later, and they'll make good like steak fingers or chicken fried steak. So there's our some of our round steaks. And then I'm going to clean up this bottom round and cut some steaks out of it. And it'll be the similar process. And there's our round steaks. Here is the front leg. That's a pretty good chunk. The top part from about here up is included in the chuck of a beef. Usually that includes the muscle that's right behind it on the rib too. We didn't cut it that way. We just took these front legs off, and there's a muscle right here and a set right here that make pretty decent steaks. There is a big tendon running through them, and so you have a piece of gristle in the middle of those steaks. You can also cut it into a roast. I sometimes on a pig or on the beef will just cut it across here with a saw and make bone-in roasts out of it. Today this is all going to go into hamburger. But on a deer, a lot of times this is where I'll get some of my jerky meat or my stew meat cuts out of this part, and I'll just fillet that off that gristle and still use those smaller pieces there. So we're going to debone this into hamburger. You can find the ridge of the scapula right here and get your knife right in by it. And there's the top part of that. Comes off there pretty good. And there's the other part of that. We're about done. We have packaged all the cut meat. Some friends of ours they've got a bigger grinder, so they ran the beef through the bigger grinder, and they're gonna bring that package to us. We're gonna put this in the freezer in a minute. We've cut it all up. You've seen the cuts. When you're cutting meat, remember, as long as you've gutted it cleanly, you can't make this meat poisonous. So any way you cut it, as long as you're willing to eat it, it's okay as long as you're cutting for yourself. Don't be afraid to go ahead and start cutting your own meat. It'll still be meat when you're done. So, this is some of our packages right now.
There's steaks and brisket. And some more tenderloin steak and a big roast.
Well, thanks for watching on how to cut this up. Remember, as you eat meat, as you're cutting meat, as you butcher your own meat, remember what it represents, that a life has to be, that there has to be death to give life. Mm-hmm. And remember the ultimate death to give us ultimate life, which was Jesus' death on the cross.
And thank you guys for watching, and may you richly be blessed today.